Exactly on time.
That's what we expect.
I was helping them to find a seat here because it's so crowded. So. Okay, good, excellent.
I'm even surprised to see you today.
What? And you yesterday? Well, to be honest, I'm not feeling that great. Where did you live?
Let me see for you. We can check it out.
No. When did you leave last time?
I don't know.
Let's start at 2:30 whatever. So.
You have another pen over there?
There's a pen?
This one, but is it okay to give along? No,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
give it along. I think so.
Where is my... Okay, so now I have lost the...
To display?
Yeah, it means that I have left it somewhere. So... Do you have the...
So now we can start.
Thank you. So you're surprised to see me here. I wasn't that drunk. Huh? Yeah, I know. All those has gone. All right. Okay. Nice. All right, so. I have the slides also.
Yeah, because there is additional material inside. I put TLS.
Okay. This one.
Not this one. This is not the slides.
Oh,
Yeah.
that one. All right. All right. So can we run it? This is IETF 96 time working group. So welcome everybody.
Good morning, Lionel.
This thing is showing.
You cannot display it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. You should be aware of the note, so we are not going to repeat it. So you have seen a couple of times this week. So anyone volunteering for taking notes? I see we have new blood in the room, so we might give them a chance to contribute, right? It doesn't matter. Anyway, so anyone? Yeah, I mean, we don't have too many or anyone else willing to take notes? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, so
you only have me and Echo and Jammer, so I can do that.
Okay.
good. After all, we actually have a bunch of stuff on the agenda. It was supposed to be an empty one. So we will hear the update on the anything overall related. So we have a couple of last times Steve giving us an update. So I think that the overload topic will be done after this meeting pretty much. And okay, group signaling. Are you going to take that? If Mark, okay. Then someone flooded our working group with the new work topics. But out of these new topics, there's one thing that we actually kind of need to spend some more time, which is the credit control application update. So 4006 piece. And that's where we are going to kind of spend the bulk of time. We already had a kind of side meeting earlier this week on Monday evening. Related to that, we also kind of need to figure out what we are going to respond to I3GGP. We still haven't responded to their LS.
There is a slide after that.
Yeah. So anyway, and okay. You know, this is slightly annoying. It will go away at some point of time, but it's because the give me a second, I will get rid of it. It's the this one. And now it's gone. Thunderbird makes wonders. Okay. You know, if you are using Thunderbird and you have some kind of virus check system in your laptop, they don't like each other, so you get in a funny loop. Okay. For the rest of the documents, we are in a pretty good shape. So the end-to-end security left the working group has been also approved. It flew through the ISG, which was kind of surprising, but it's in the well, that doesn't usually happen. So and then also the request message priority thing is also in with the editor.
Stefan, I think that for the end-to-end security, you have an action point.
Somebody has.
I don't know who actually.
What kind of?
It's the kind of to be able for the write-up. So I know you have sent a proposal, and but no one has response, right?
So you mean this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's blocked because the IESG write-up is not.
It's a Stephen Farrell. I forget. I'll track it down. I think the last I recall is I sent some mail, somebody
Yeah.
saying,
I remember.
"What about this?" or something, and got no response.
Yeah.
So I'll send another mail and try to take it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. AVP level security. Okay. So I had some thoughts about doing it. So we have the kind of renewed document. I didn't receive any feedback on that. So that's why I didn't push it any further. But maybe now that we have a lively group again, so maybe I'll push it forward. Okay, so the bulk of the stuff comes from the Lyle, but the Great Control application, we actually have a small group of guys doing so. Lyle, Dave, and Yuval have been pushing it forward. This is actually excellent, so that it's not like a one-man effort.
So Stephen Farrell, just to go back and about the end-to-end security, just to correct it, you did answer. So it's on me to just push the button.
Yep. Right. So group signaling, we will hear about that soon. And Steve will give an update about the rest of the overload status. All right. So should we take this now or later on? Okay. So as you remember, we received the license statement for SA5 and also CT3 and CT4 were copied. And they were asking about what we are supposed to do with the RFC 4006. And they basically had these two things like, are we going to update them? And if not, what they should be doing. So their worries were about it that the base protocol has been renewed and the old Great Control application contains a lot of material that are kind of outdated nowadays. So as you know, we already started working on the BIS version, so we are going to kind of respond to them that we are on this first bullet. So we have a plan to update, produce a BIS version. I wouldn't say any timeline when we are finished, but we can say something like that we have an individual document that is going to be adopted as a working group item, and we are furiously working to complete it. So so that's basically going to be the response from us, and the Lionel and I, we are going to come up with some text and we'll circulate that after this week on the mailing list and then send it back. Do you happen to remember when is the next CT meetings, when they are?
Next week?
Next week.
But for SA5, it will be in August, right? End of August. So
Right.
we have time to send back an LS response.
Yeah, that would be nice.
And for the first point on the update of the 406, so it's ongoing. And for the second point, that is more related to how to change the reference in the document where you were relying on the base protocol and now you have to rely on the new one. In CT4, or actually in a 3GPP, we have done some work, and I will propose also some text maybe to add in the design guideline. As a recommendation to move from the old one to the new one with the basics text that will actually repeat some part of the text already present in the new version of the base protocol, but just as a guideline.
Yep. All right. So so you will be gone next week, right? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, before the SA5 meeting, we have something. So, and you will be in the SA5 meeting, right? Okay, good. That's actually excellent. So you can when that LS response arrives, let's say Fabi, you can kind of then convey the information also from this meeting there. That's very good. All right, milestones. So we can actually go and do a bit of cleanup there. But yeah, okay.
Maybe we can jump to
the
presentation.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. So, Steve. Let me find that one.
My just-in-time slides. Sorry for sending them so late.
Don't be sorry. Good grief.
Stephen, just there is somebody now in Jabber, and he is just wondering who is it that's going to be attending that meeting?
In SC5 or?
Yeah, just a name. He's remote on audio, so he didn't get the name.
State your name at the mic, Marie. Go to the mic and state your name.
So Maris Gardella from Nokia.
Okay.
Where's the download? Okay. Can I do this?
So it's when you have up already. There you go. Okay. So I don't know if this will be the last time or not, hopefully. These are the 4 drafts that are currently in process. The first one is the message priority. It's waiting in the RFC editor's queue. Probably pop out pretty soon. The second one is agent overload that defines the peer report type. I think we finished working group last call, right? It has been updated to reflect. Those version numbers are probably wrong, actually.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, but so the latest version I think is 06. It'll be moving through the process now that we finished working group last call. I'll talk about rate control next. We got limited comments on working group last call. I know Gene did a review and primarily had editorial comments. We really need more, I think, need more update or more comment on it. I think it's pretty stable, hasn't changed in a long time. I'd like to get it off my plate. Probably need another reviewer or two. And then load, if you go to the next slide, the working group last call for the load draft raised a number of questions, and there's still a lot of discussion ongoing on the list. I have been tied up the last couple of weeks, so I haven't been able to deal with them on the list yet. I will do so after, well, I'm on vacation next week, so after that, I'll do that. But just to summarize the issues, the draft uses DNS SRV as a way of defining the encoding and the meaning of the load AVP. I think that needs to be expanded on a little bit on what that means. And then there are a number of questions. Is there, right now the draft says that for both the computing the load value, how that's done, and using the load value, how that's done, is implementation specific. There's some discussion on whether we need some normative text around that in both cases. And then also, do we need more information? Do we need to specify not only the equivalent of what percentage is available at a node, but do we also need to say what the maximum, what is that as a percentage of? I don't think we need to. I have some work on my plate to convince people on the list that if you're using the algorithms as specified in the SRV draft, that you don't need to actually know what the full capacity of the node is. but so that's an action on me. And then, then the question, do we need to define the load algorithm, or the distribution algorithm, and how you compute the value? If there's anybody has any comment on that now, please bring it up. Otherwise, we'll continue the conversation on the list. No comments?
So far, yeah.
Okay, I mean, and we're having a good discussion on the list on this. I think a few issues have been raised. It's just kind of, the ball is in my court to further that discussion.
Actually, I was in the same situation, so lack of time, but I will also react on that. It's good to have a discussion on this point on the mailing list, and but
Yeah, I agree. But we will likely have, this came up because we had working group last call, forced people to kind of to look at it. There's potential for significant change, so I'm sure we will have another working group last call before the document advances. Hopefully we can do that before South Korea, but I may be up here one more time.
Okay.
So that's all right.
Thank you. Okay.
yeah. So the next topic is group signaling. So Marco is not there, so I will give an update. So the status of the work. So so Marco has initiated an update of the documents. So he was preparing this for this meeting, but unfortunately, lack of time also because he was fully booked just before the IETF meeting. So it's still an ongoing action. There is a real commitment. So we have even defined a work plan beginning in September with conference call and so on to be able to conclude this one and addressing all the comments received from Steve. The goal is to terminate this document and to send it as soon as available when ready, if no comment, in working group last call and to see what's going on after that. So pretty short, but it was just to say that it is not forgotten.
All right. So our next topic will be this one. Okay. So you done?
Yeah.
Good. So let's hit in the load of the new work. So let's start with the RFC 406 piece. So which one of you is going to? Okay, Ivan.
You have the latest presentation.
I just took it down from the.
When was sent?
Yesterday.
Oof. So no. So we can.
Let me find it.
Just send it over email.
Give me a second. Do. It's gonna take a while. Okay. Steve. There. Oh. Okay. It's coming up. Let's go here. Okay, it's there. Why is it not showing? I sometimes hate these Windows machines. Okay. All right.
Okay. So in general, the goal here is to update DCCA with
the new base diameter spec and other diameter spec that were updated since the time it was written, and also fix issues, clarifications, and also think that along the way people just ran into when they implemented DCCA in the field, they got into points that were vague or unclear, so we wanted to clarify them and fix them. So the first slide is things that we felt that are simple and straightforward enough to just put without lots of discussions. So if you can go to, please, to the next slide, I'll just quickly go through these. These were, like, if you look at the GitHub, those changes were already made. So changing the numbers from 3588 to 3733, also changing the NASRAC references to the more updated ones, changing references related to security. So in the original diameter base spec, there was no mentioning of TLS. Errata that was opened on it a while back. The IPv6 references were dated, and the 3GPP charging references were also not up to date. There was a change in how do you describe AVPs with related to the encryption that doesn't exist anymore, and the should not column also doesn't exist. So we removed them as they are unnecessary, and also added an appendix for saying what are the changes from RFC 4006. So if you want to look at the actual changes, you can diff on the GitHub to see the changes. Now there are some more interesting points that are not that so technical as the ones before, and this is the first one. So this is a point came from Lyle that the current filter is not very powerful in the sense that it cannot describe QoS. Well, even the classification part of it is not as powerful as it should be in more modern systems. But mainly the issue is that you just had like a filter ID and some predefined logic on your enforcement point that will have to map to this filter ID, and this is a very awkward and inefficient mechanism, while if you can actually convey the QoS that you need to do upon final unit depletion, then it will be a much easier process. But the first thing was, hey, let's just add another AVP in this grouped AVP, but apparently the original final unit indication was not extensible. So we had to come up with a new AVP, QoS final unit indication. The language, of course, will make it optional, so everything is backward compatible. And this grouped AVP will have the new filter that has all the goodness of QoS and other things in it. And of course, it will be extensible. So in the future, if anyone wants to add some stuff to it, they don't need to come up with a new AVP. So that's the first point.
Lyle Bird, Sprint. I just wanted to add to that, the language that we're adding at the end of these AVP sections will have the old AVP points out that if you need QoS, it points to the new AVP, and the new AVP actually points out that if you need backwards compatibility, it points back to the old. This is similar to the AVP setup we had in 7155, where we moved away from the QoS filter, I believe it was the QoS filter indication, or excuse me, filter rule. That was a string formats in the original document, and then in 7055 it just moved to the filter rule itself.
Next slide, please. This is a clarification point. This is something that happens quite often in the field, and the spec says that the client must report when the granted unit are depleted. But the issue is that, packets have sizes, and it's very unlikely that any enforcement point would chop the packet at half and report the exact amount. So what I and other people have seen is that what is reported as the USU is actually not the accurate consumption. so it would match the GSU. And we feel that this is wrong interpretation of the specification. A more correct interpretation would be that you need to report exactly the amount that was consumed. And, you know, there could be even legal implications to that, not reporting exactly the amount that was consumed. So it's not really an addition to the spec, but it is a clarification that we feel that is needed. So implementers would understand that the GSU, the USU may exceed the GSU. Any comments? OCS vendors? No. Yeah, next slide, please.
Actually, this one was an output of the discussion that we had on Monday. So for people in the meeting, it was okay. I think that if you have further comments, please say it to the mic. I think it's okay. It's a clarification, and there is nothing anywhere in the spec saying one or the other. So it's just to consider that it is two distinct information, and it's fine. After that, you can do whatever you want in your implementation.
Okay, thank you. This is another point. This is more a modification or enhancement to the spec. So the spec deals with graceful service termination, which means that you don't just cut the service with out of diameter credit limit reached, but in case of final indication, you can actually terminate the session by redirecting, by shaping down, by doing all the goodness. You have validity time on the action of the termination and so on. So this is a very powerful, useful, and good mechanism, but it doesn't exist if you have no funds. And this is, although less common, this is also possible because there are different reasons why you can reach the end of your credit without knowing it's your final grant. And I listed, hopefully, 2 reasons why that may happen. So in this case, we want to be able to also benefit from the final unit indication and graceful service termination process. And what we suggest to do is to say that if the final grant that is given is of size 0, then instead of just looking at that as a grant of size 0, that it means it's immediately you run out of the grant when traffic arrives, and then you send the final CCR update for the service, then you would immediately terminate the service without the need for another interrogation, which is kind of unnecessary because you know that this is the final one. It would be more prompt action on the fact that you ran out of credit, which means you don't need to wait for traffic in order to figure that out. You can do that immediately upon receival of the CCA, as well as that would save on the protocol, on the signaling for another interrogation that is unnecessary. And if you go to the next slide, I'm just showing that I copied from the spec the workflow for the final unit indication, but saying that if there's a 0 grant, then I don't need to wait for traffic and send another CCR final. I start to deploy the actions, restrictions, and so on immediately, and this should be fine. So this is a bit of a modification. Just as a side note, in somewhere between release, I think 11 and 12, in 3GPP technical spec 32299 GY, they added exactly this point. So it won't come as a surprise to vendors. So I'm trying to say here.
It's not a comment. It's more. I think that we will. So the proposal, it's fine. I think that we have to consider if it is as you said. So it may not be a surprise for existing 3GPP vendors. We need to figure out clearly if there is any impact on the spec from a protocol aspect, saying that you are changing something, or if the receiver of the 0 GSU is not able to understand this information, what's happened. So we just need to figure out from the protocol point of view. I think that the text is okay, but we need to see if there is an implementation impact. There may be or may not, but at least we need to figure out.
I think we can add maybe clarification saying that if you do want to react just like today, which means that once traffic arrives, you figure out that you have a 0 grant, which means that you ran out of the grant immediately, and you send a final message, it's also okay.
Yeah.
So, that was a point. Next one is about IPv6 reference. So we were referencing a dated specification of IPv6, and it really applied to the textual representation of the IPv6 address in case of redirect address. So the original text said like there's a preferred and an alternate ways to do that, while and referring to the IPv6 specifications also calling something preferred and something alternate, while the new IPv6 specification just say, there are a couple of ways to present the IPv6 textual format of addresses, and what we suggest here is to reference to the new spec and just say, you may present in whatever way that is valid in the IPv6 spec. The next point started like something very small and then turned out to be something pretty ugly. It was noted in the mailing list that user equipment info doesn't specifically support IMEI without a softer version. So the first idea was very simple, just add an enum for the software version. That sounds very reasonable. And you go to IANA, you ask for a change in the enums, and you add that, and that is a straightforward process. The problem is that, and this was something new to some of the people here, though we thought we know the diameter spec well, is that this requires a new diameter application ID. And this is a big no-no, which means because this will require lots of interoperability tests to be done between lots of vendors in the world, and nobody wants that just to add another enum. So the solution that we came up with is that would actually need a new AVP, and the new AVP, in order to make sure that this is future-proof, would not have an enum in it, but would actually have a sub-AVP of the different types. So the original user equipment info, I didn't put it here, but just for, it's like it has a value and it has an enumerated type, which is IMEI-ISV, MAC, MSISDN, whatever, all kind of things like that. So the UI, sorry. What we suggest is that each of those types will have their own AVP, and will have, of course, the whole grouped AVP as extensible. So in the future, when new types arrive, it will be easily added. Now, the thing is that IMEI is the thing that started the discussion, but there are others. So we scanned through the spec and found a couple other cases that require similar treatment. And these are the redirect server and the subscription ID that suffer from the same problem. So here it's like a bigger change. Of course, all these will be optional, so you could use these or the old ones. But if you want a new type of subscription ID, or in the future we would like to add a new type of subscription ID or a new type of user equipment info, then we'll have to use those new AVPs.
So can you clarify why the others have been identified to also as potentially to be extended? Yes, can you clarify why did you identify the three?
Oh, yes, sorry, yes. So we've looked at all the enumerated AVPs. We said, like, okay, this is the list of the enumerated AVPs. I can send you the analysis or to the group. So some of them, like unit types, not really, we don't foresee a reason to extend them. Like we have bytes and time and user specific, something like that, and money. So this covered pretty much everything that we can foresee. But subscription ID, Like we have lots of them. Now, tomorrow they'll come with a new wireless or wireline or whatever technology that will have new identifiers for subscribers. They'll need a new type. And redirect server, currently it's SIP and URL, but who knows? Tomorrow there could be a new application which is completely different than HTTP or a SIP or plain IP that you can redirect to. So.
Okay. Sorry?
When you go to the microphone, there's a remote person, so can you say your name clearly before you speak?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So Maris Gardella. So yes, I understand. This is your anticipation of those you can imagine which will be needed in the future, right?
Yes.
So okay. So my question is also if now we are considering extending the equipment info in this BIS. What is the process in the future once this BIS will be closed to extend this one at least, or also the others?
So
I'm not comfortable with the IETF process, but so we will need to make proposals.
maybe somebody else will answer
Yes.
that.
Sorry, we were not listening. Yeah, please, Maris.
Maris, I was asking if an extension of existing, for example, an extension of the now proposed user equipment info extension is needed. What is the process to extend the values?
Oh,
So first of all, this one is a new AVP, right? So this new AVP is a group AVP, and because you have the star AVP, it means that you can add any other AVP. So so for this spec and from the IETF point of view, we don't care. Now, if the AVP that you would like to add, you have two choices. Either you decide to define the standard AVP, so you will come here and ask for a standard value, or you will define your own, so the 3GPP specific AVPs, and there is no action at all within IETF. It's why for instance, in the design guideline, it is strongly recommended. It's not a must, but it is strongly recommended to add the star AVP there, because it means that you can extend it freely. So either you will have an IANA request for AVP allocation AVP code allocation, or nothing at all.
Okay, thank you. And in the current process of doing this RFC 406 BIS, if I come with a new proposal for an additional value of the user equipment info extension, is it still time to do it?
Yeah,
of course.
I think so. Yes.
So this document is still as an individual document. We are going to run the kind of adoption call today and also then on the mailing list, but to a point that the document leaves the working group, it's kind of open for. So now is the window, and if you have something to add there, please propose it, and we'll check if it fits the purpose, and if it does, then we put it in. So.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Hi, Stephen Farrell. So this is a question from me, but not wearing any particular hat. If you go back, yeah. So the landscape with respect to privacy has changed since 2005. So I think if although a bunch of these were already in 4006, I think it would be worth considering. And I don't know what documentation, if any, might be needed in the draft. What are the privacy considerations of defining new AVPs, particularly that have personally identifying information like this? And in the case of diameter, it may well be justified, but I think it needs, the working group should figure out, is it justified, and decide that it is, and then document that appropriately, which may require not much text, but I think it's an issue that now is much more seen to be important than in 2005.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's been actually that we need to have a kind of because we have such kind of information in draft, we need anyway to have the privacy consideration section anyway.
Yeah, but I guess this kind of stuff will flag that up kind of most clearly. Yeah.
I'm not sure this is, I mean, the only thing that we had here is IMEI on top of IMEI SV that is already there. So we're not exposing any new.
Yeah, but if something new comes up,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and in general, because there's a bunch of information that allows kind of relieves very clearly who is the subscriber, and the current document doesn't have any privacy consideration
Oh.
text, so it wouldn't hurt kind of writing a few lines there to kind of describe the situation
Yes,
and that stuff.
so we should probably add a privacy section. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Great.
and while doing that, it's also a good thing, kind of have a new look into the security considerations in general. Things have changed, so that might be a good thing to kind of.
So while I'm at the mic, still Stephen Farrell. So one thing on that is if you're updating the TLS spec, there's now a PCP about using TLS or C7525. So again, I think the working group could consider, do you want to do that? It makes changes to the kind of recommended cipher suites and things like that. So maybe it's a change you do or don't want. If you do want it, then it might make using TLS here more like in other applications, and that could be good. So I think that's part of like just having a look at the security consideration stuff again, I think.
Okay. The last thing is that kind of by accident, we figured out there's some inconsistent language in sections 563 compared to 562 and 561, as in 563, we don't say when we're starting to deploy the final unit actions. It's just omitted. So we just suggest to copy a short phrase from the other places saying that we start deploying it when consumption of the final unit is done. It's like pretty straightforward, I guess. Any implementer followed that. It's just not in the spec.
All right.
That's it.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
yeah. No, you can stay. So, Lionel Moran, so as individual and chair, depending on my comments, I think that we so it's fine. So anything related to clarification and some slight modification caused by the addition of the new version of the base protocol is fine. For instance, as I said, we may have also some clarification on the command CCF format, for instance, or some other stuff to clarify in the spec. For any new requirements, I think it's fine to incorporate that is something that is already implemented in a specific way, and to say that it is something really required. And I think we should try to stay focused on this type of extensibility mechanism, not extensibility mechanism, but a kind of a new feature to support in this new version, because we need to take into account that it is a revision of something implemented in a vendor-specific way, but maybe also used somewhere else. So we need to keep the change from a protocol point of view minimal as possible. If it is text, clarifying text, it's okay, as I said, but try to not to modify too much, for instance, the existing AVP or when it is not deemed required.
We try to follow those rules.
Yeah.
I mean, there were other very creative and innovative ideas that we dropped just because they had nothing to do with this particular update. Do you see anything from this list that is too distraction to the?
No, it was more a comment saying that now it is not anymore, or it will not be anymore an individual draft. It will become a working group. But it's not a grant to say that you can put whatever you want in this new version.
Yeah.
The real intent is to have something updated based on the RFC 6733 and also according to existing implementation and use of this credit control application.
Yeah. Okay.
Maris Gardella. So from the comment from Lionel, I understand that his recommendation is that we do not put we stick more on with a refinement process and some correction, and we do not introduce too much new requirements. Otherwise, they should be highlighted. But from this comment, I see we introduced some enhancements from
No,
not this one, but
not this one.
for example, the Q final unit. This is something for me. It's not just a modification, right?
Yeah, the QS final unit, the first drive for that was actually to refer to a more updated other RFC. So there's another RFC that updates the filter type. So the original idea was just to reference a more updated RFC, like we did with many other cases. Like the original 4006 was written in 2004 or 6, I don't remember, something like that. So many of the RFC that it refers are now more updated. So one of them is the one that describes the filters. And just because we couldn't add a new sub-AVP, we had to come up with a new QoS final unit. It's like this wasn't the original intent. We were kind of driven to do that because otherwise we couldn't have referenced the more recent RFC describing how filters should look like.
Yes, correct. But at the end, it will be something new from because you add an additional information.
I agree. Yes.
So it's an enhancement.
Yeah,
It's not a
so
correction.
it will be new stuff, but you don't need to use it. We still keep we have to keep the old stuff in. So it's like one of the things that we need to be very clear when we are doing this BIS version, that if someone implements the credit control application based on this BIS version, but the peer is behaving based on the old one, so just for 406, those two have to be able to interoperate without any issue. So whatever we put in here in a BIS version, very good care has to be taken that we don't break anything. So
Alberts. So what prompted us here was there's the 4005 BIS, which became RFC 7155. I think I got my numbers right here. And in there, they had in their AVP, they had an extensibility option. So when they did the upgrade from the original filter rule that didn't have QoS to the one that did, it was actually a very simple item. And they were fortunate enough that all they had to do was put in a note. And what that note did was, well, there was kind of a workaround in 7155. There was an older AVP that basically took the original IP filter rule string and enhanced it. But of course, by doing that, had to do a very long grammar and format. And so that was originally in the NASPEC. But for some strange reason, that AVP was never copied. Well, for obvious reasons now, that was never copied into 4006. And that was due in part to the fact that they were really developed independently. And so in your NAS applications, you've always been able to specify a filter rule with QoS, but in your charge control, you've never been able to do that. However, RFC 5777 has come along and supports this. So when it came time for the upgrade of RFC 4005 BIS, it was a very simple matter because it was already extensible to say, okay, look, you can still use these strings because they do support QoS. However, it's a very long, obtuse format in the old 4005. If you're looking for something new and you don't require backwards compatibility, use the filter rule. Unfortunately, as is being pointed out here, this is not extensible. So, you know, and if you recall on the mailing list, I actually just said, we'll just extend it. And then Yoni pointed out, wait, that's not even possible. We were kind of stuck, unfortunately, with this particular option and had no other technical option to do this. And I guess it's points of view. We could also view this as we're trying to stay consistent with what 7155 is now, which does have an option for someone to introduce the filter rule and QoS. And really, you could almost argue that even if we didn't do that in 7155, just to kind of true up 4006, which had no QS option whatsoever, we would have just added we'd have to add something just to have parity with the old 4005 spec. So I think this is important that we have consistency between related applications like this, right? Between our NAS and our charge control. And like I said, it's just unfortunate that the way the AVP was built, we couldn't go the same route that we did for the 4005 BIS.
Maris?
Marit, but at the end, they will be exclusive, right? We can still be able to use the final unit. They will be exclusive.
So it was my point. It's something that we, as explained by Uni, I think that when we rely on new AVP to support new functionality, you should be able to interpret with implementation based on the previous specification. So if the other one was expecting, so it depends how it is used, but if it is expected normally to receive the old AVP with the old information, this information needs to be present. You could have extra information, and if the other one is able to use this extra information, it's better for you. So we have to consider the BIS as supporting everything that was not wrong, because we can correct something that was wrong. Errata is for that. But everything that was not wrong, we have to keep it, and we can add additional stuff if required, for instance, to support new way to convey the QS information. So it means that you will have to keep some AVPs, but if the other one is able to support the new AVP, he will look at the new AVP and know that it is the relevant information or the complementary information that you will use in addition of the first one.
That actually brings in one other point, though. Should we also think about something that you would able to tell the other end that I'm actually supporting the new stuff? It would mean that you send like some dummy AVP or you have some kind of feature. Well, in 3GPP you have the
feature lists.
Feature list. You have that thing. So, but I'm also thinking like, do we need that kind of functionality also in the IETF RFC? I don't know, something to think about.
Yeah, but that might introduce the bigger enhancement, I think, altogether.
So it's at least at this stage, it's for this document, it's for any modification that we will, or any new feature that we will introduce in this spec, we need to consider carefully what would be, it was my initial comment. We need to evaluate what would be the impact on the client or the server if not supported. If there is no, for instance, if it is for additional information or a new optional optimized behavior, it's not an issue if the other one doesn't understand. If you expect some mandatory behavior or it would change the existing behavior, we have an impact and we need to discover if the other one is supporting this new mechanism. So it may not be needed, but depending on the output of this analysis, so it's when we extend and when we revise an existing RFC, it's not only about adding stuff or removing stuff, it's also to analyze the impact on existing, so the interoperability issues with existing implementation.
I agree. We will do further analysis on this particular one.
Yeah. So like a couple of cases are like, especially for example, with this filter IDs and the having the quality service signal. So it's not a desired output that you need to send both all the time, just to be sure.
Right.
So, but if that is the only way of making sure that things work, then you have to do it. So, but it's not the.
It would require us to think carefully on, do they contradict and so on. So.
Okay. So done?
Yes.
Okay. We should actually ask for the adoption at this
Yeah.
point. Yeah. So,
Roland? Yeah, you can sit.
so
Roland? Stay. Just 1 minute. Please.
So, as you have seen, I hope that people have read the 4006 piece.
Who was ready?
Who has read it?
So 02, obviously.
Okay, cool. Not too many, but anyway, you will. So, yeah, you have to. Yeah. So this is something that we really want to adopt into a working group, so that the kind of have the working group control of over the document and make it in a fast track, kind of so that we actually get it completed. Also, so we will bring the adoption for the working group. So if you think that the time working group should take this work as a working group item, please raise your hand.
So you also have one from Jabber, who's an editor, Dave Dawson.
Okay, good. Okay. So we have to. Anyone thinking that we should not take this into working group? None. Okay, good. Thank you. So we will also run this adoption call through the email list, but it looks like that there's not going to be any issue.
Alberts, just a quick clarification. We have, at this point in the draft we've submitted, most of the editorial changes that were obvious, errata and stuff. A lot of this, and obviously we have an action plan for the QoS final unit indication here, but a lot of the other stuff is tentatively able to be committed. Is it your expectation then, as we move this in, that we make the stuff we've agreed upon here today into the new version submission, or just take it?
So the thing is that you have 01 now available. The thing is that once we go through the kind of email adoption call, you just rename that to 00 IETF document 00, and then you go and
add these.
Add these to the 01 version of the adopted. So
Okay.
So the first version has to be the same that we adopt. So don't go and change it.
So, and before the 001 and the 01, we will discuss anyway this on the mailing list, and you will take the conclusion of each different points. So my recommendation will be to create a thread per topics, and you will take just the output of all these topics to create the new version of the document.
All right, thank you.
And actually, I would encourage you to kind of use the issue tracker. Just put the stuff there, so it's each of the new things that you want to discuss, open a ticket in an issue tracker, so we can then close them one by one. So that kind of helps us with the bookkeeping. All right. Thank you. And then the next one in the agenda is
Mine.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take it down somewhere. Which one it is?
Go down. Go stop. No. Update of diameter design.
This one.
This one. Okay, it's just so Lionel. Yeah, please. So at the last meeting, so based on the discussion that I had with vendors and other operators, we had a short discussion at the last meeting regarding the type of message that you are supposed to receive when there is an error. So the type of answer. So as I said in my previous presentation, you have the EBIT, and the EBIT is so it's a bit in the header of the command, and it's to indicate that it is first of all a protocol error. It could be used also for other permanent error, like unable to comply. And it is said that when this bit is set, you need to have a kind of a special CCF, common CCF format. So you are not supposed to receive the normal answer. You need to suppose you are supposed to receive. So next slide. You are supposed to receive something formatted like this with the session ID, origin host, and so on. So this one is not following, for instance, the common format of any diameter EAP answer, for instance, or CCA. There is no required CCA stuff inside. So, and this causes some interoperability issue because some people are, so it is bad, as would say Uni, but some people are reading only the 3GPP specification, and in the 3GPP specification, it is said all the commands, all the answers need to comply with this format. When they receive, for instance, redirect indication with this format, and some required AVP normally in the CCA are not received, they say it's not compliant, so I not deal with it. And it breaks the system, especially because it is an answer. So there is nothing to say when there is no way to react when you receive the answer. The only thing is to have a log, and there is nothing else. So the client will not try to reinitiate anything, and there is no description of the behavior. The procedure will fail and the session will fail. So it is a clarification, and for instance, an additional clarification is that the redirect host information or everything really, related to redirection need to be part of this answer message when the result code is a redirection indication. That was not even consistent in the existing it's consistent because you have the star AVP, so you are supposed to be able to add any AVP, but because we are describing the answer message, this indication should be there. So it is why they are in red, because it is something that I've introduced here. So next slide. So I don't know why I say so, but so. So we have this is, I was saying that diameter unable to deliver and diameter redirect indication, I think it's something relevant because it is where we have some interoperability issues. For instance, for the redirect indication, you are not supposed to receive the DA, as I said. So and why it is like this is because, for instance, if it is a relay in the pass, is not even able to generate the normal message. So it's not aware that, for instance, in a CCA, you need to have some required AVP because it's just a simple relay. It's not supposed to understand or to follow the semantic of any application. It's just here to route, request, and answer. Next slide. So this is what was distributed on the mailing list because not enough time to do at the same time 3GPP and IETF, especially when both are consecutive. But I've proposed a text on the mailing list. This is what I will propose to add at least on a revision of the design guideline. So it is a kind of recommendation. So it is strongly recommended to follow this recommendation, of course. It doesn't break anything, and there is no must here. But for instance, the first one is to say that when you are defining new application, it is recommended to rely on what it is defined, obviously, in the base protocol. But this is something missing in all the new specification. It is only assumed that people will read both, but when you are regarding the technical information regarding the implementation of the command, you may not be aware of exactly how it should work with a specific bit set in the header commands. So I think the recommendation would be to have this kind of clarification. And obviously, so you are supposed to be able to receive this information without creating any interoperability issues. Next slide. Along with this discussion, we had also so the specific case of the redirect indication, but it applies also to some others. We had the same discussion on overload control. there is some protocol errors that are meant only for the first peer receiving this information. For instance, you have a client, a relay, and the server, and you receive too busy or you receive redirect indication. This type of information is not meant to be sent back to the client because there is no way for the client to do whatever, nothing about this information. The too busy, it means that you will try to select another peer, or you will just send back unable to deliver. Yeah, you can comment if you want. Yeah.
Yuval, so regarding too busy, what if you want the answer want to signal that it's too busy? Then the client may decide, especially in application that deals with failover at application level, like CCFH and stuff like that. So it might be the client need to decide which is the alternative end server to send the message to.
And it's why we are creating the overload stuff to be able to communicate this information to the client. Because when you have too busy, there is not even any indication on what to do because it is per request. You can be too busy for this request, but for the new request, you will not be too busy. So it is just for the request to be able to say, I should be, normally I'm able to handle this request, but not at this time. So please select another one. But it doesn't mean that for all the other requests, you will need to do that. And to be able to retransmit this information, it could be done directly by the relay, not by the client. So for instance, you receive a request from the US, you are in Germany. The relay in Germany is able to do that. You don't have to send back the error to be able to retransmit the request.
Yuval, so again, I'm concerned about failovers at our application level. For example, it could be that two servers that are serving the same application have one backend database, so they can share so you can fail over mid-session for another transaction, while two servers that they can serve the same application, you can just initiate a new session to each one of them to load balance, but you cannot fail over between them. And this is often information that is conveyed at application level. Relays would not do that, would not know that in many cases. So in this case, I would like to get the notification all the way back to the client.
No, it will not work. The relay, if the client is, what will do the client with this information?
Would pick another destination host.
Sorry?
Would pick another destination host. It can go through the same relay, but would send to another destination host.
But we can go on this one, but it will not work. It's exactly the same type of discussion that we have with the overload report. Steve is there, and he can react on that also. It's you may assume that it is, but from the base protocol point of view, the only thing that is said is that the too busy means that you are not able to handle this request, and if you are not able to contact another peer, in your situation, normally you should have the relay should have two possible paths to send the request. If on the first one you receive too busy, you will try the second path. But it's not about destination host or ever. It's just about how to route a request. Now, if he's not able to route the request, he will send back unable to deliver. And it is what it is written in the spec today. If you want to do something else, as at the application level and so on, now you have a new, a nice feature that it is already introduced into GPP, that is the overload report. With the overload report, you could say, stop sending, or you have specific information like in the charging application, where you have failover server and so on, but you are not relying on the redirect indication in the result code.
Okay, Yuval, so I agree that the new mechanism would solve this problem, but that would require to be actually adopted and implemented. I'm saying existing systems, they use these indications to figure out, because overload indication, I mean, it's a new spec, right?
But you mean which one? Which one? The too busy or
both the too busy and both too busy and unable to deliver is used in existing system that did not implement overload indication for the applications to figure out failovers.
The unable to deliver will be sent back to the client. The too busy will never be sent back to the client. If you have an implementation, the too busy is on peer connection, is not from the client to the server. The too busy could be a client, it could be the relay in front of the client, it could be the server itself. So as it is written today, there is no way. So there may be some implementation relying on the too busy to do that, but it is wrong.
Okay, I mean, I agree that this what you're saying is the what the spec says, but because, and I guess this is the reason why overload indication was introduced, to try to figure out those issues in a
Exactly.
according to a standard way. But I think the fact of the matter is that there are many implementations that try to address problems with the diameter interface that.
Yeah, but it's exactly the issue. But you have also, it's many, it's not many, and you have also other implementations that are compliant with. So for instance, if you are expecting that any relay in the world will propagate your too busy, you are screwed because you will not receive this information. You will just receive an error to deliver. So it's why we need to fix it. And one way to fix it was to say, okay, we keep the use of the too busy, for instance, as it is, that is handled by the peer receiving this information, and to create something else if you want to propagate any information from the client, from the server to the client. And we have also specific mechanism now, even to propagate if it is a proxy in the middle that is overloaded or whatever. So obviously you will have to implement that. Before that, you can do whatever you want. You can expect whatever you want, but one way to finalize it in the proper way would be to rely on this mechanism.
Okay.
Yes, Maryse. Yes, about this diameter too busy, it was also my understanding that these are the current implementation today to handle the overload over the diameter interface. And my understanding was that the overload draft or RFC was introduced more as an improvement to anticipate the overload. But okay, this was my understanding at that point.
Right. Actually, almost. The overload was there to be able to convey the kind of too busy information, but with additional information from end to end. And the load was introduced to be able to anticipate any overload situation. If I'm correct, Steve. So, but yeah, the initial, we had a long discussion about the use of the too busy and so on when we have defined the requirement for the overload control mechanism. And it was, I would say, the main part of the discussion. And we end up with the fact that we need something new to do. And it is what it is now in the RFC describing the overload report.
Okay.
Just one final point. I think we're not late. It's yeah, because it is so. I will extend the design guidelines. I asked for some feedback from people from 3GPP because I know that we had discussion regarding the design guideline and so on. So maybe there is some of the points that could be introduced in the document, and one of them would be, for instance, some recommendation on how to move from the old spec to the new one regarding the base protocol. And if there is any other clarification, so next one, so will be to review, comment, propose, and whatever. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, Lyle. So the rest of the day is yours. Do you have any particle order that you want to?
No. No particular order.
Let me check what I have.
Whatever's convenient.
Okay. So I'll just start like from here.
Sure. Good morning. I have several small documents that I want to talk about today. They're in new submissions and different kinds of requests based on where things are at with each of them. throughout the day. So this is in particular domains and arbitrary mask filters. Next slide, please. So if you know some of my past work, this is yet another extension to RFC 5777. We're not intending to introduce any new sort of top level structures that you would see in commands. We're really just trying to add more abilities to the filters. So in this case, we have two aspects. So the first one is query domains to filters, just to kind of give you an idea of what we do, is whether it's child protections or zero rating, those sort of things. Right now, what happens in production is since we can't support these actually in the rules, we actually run these domains, these IDs in flat files, and we side load them into the switches and the various devices in production. And so there's obviously numerous downsides to that outside of this. And the other thing, you know, we can't do is, I mean, it takes us a few days. And as we move toward network function virtualization, this problem only gets worse. So what we're proposing is basically the query name format. So this is really seen in the responses. And you see the proposed AVP here, where we just run a list of names into the filter, and then obviously the associated actions in the 5777 rule would be pushed in. I did get a response from Yuval on basically a clarifying section there, and we'll make those updates. So thank you for that in the response. So it's a little bit clearer in the RFC is exactly where and what we're after. Now, oh, I'm sorry, go back. There is one assumption here. If you actually can see this, this is not intended to break DNSSEC. So this is actually intended to only be enforceable if you, for whatever reason, at the enforcement point can actually see this DNS traffic. We're not advocating breaking into things here. So this is not giving you arbitrary license or anything else. It's just a format. So there's a huge assumption here. And I think it pretty much holds, at least for most operators. So next slide. So we have some SDN related filters. The big difference that we have in SDN is we essentially have arbitrary binary masks. So we can actually put the mask at any section versus a prefix where we see the mask really happening at the end of the bits in the design. This is, once again, something that is new, introduced in SDN over the last 4 or 5 years, but not currently specified inside any of the specs we have. So we propose basically adding several masks. We also, very much like the last RFC with this, we're surprised to find out that we didn't have flow labels as something inside the filter in 5777. So if you're familiar with our last submission, we also discovered 1 or 2 AVPs like ECN that wasn't in the filter. Just there's a lot of things in these headers, so it's missed. So what we're proposing is adding the flow label, which we hope to kind of true up and get a little bit more consistent with 5777. And then when we looked at masks, and we looked at what already supported mask and what made sense, we decided to add the flow label mask pattern and as well as the IP address mask pattern. You've also pointed out that we did not add a corresponding IPv6 address. We'd actually put in an IPv4 format, so we'll add that and a corresponding mask as well. One note with this, unlike bit patterns, we looked at them as octet strings just because this allows a little bit more flexibility. And when we talked with our downstream stakeholders about whether we should support integers or other items, they were more into the binary or bit string formats. They just felt it was a little bit easier in terms of being able to troubleshoot. However, kind of an open question I would have to the group is, that's all well and good, and that's more of an administrative thing, and that can be basically through software, through a UI or a console, turned back to a binary format. If we feel we want to keep things compact, then I would say we just move these to the actual compatible format. So for example, the flow label mask pattern AVP, we would not have as an octet string, but as a UNT32. So I'd like some opinion now on that offline on the mailing list, but we do have a couple of design options there. So, and once again, this, unlike the previous one, will be added to the to from spec. The DNS query, because it's not necessarily a to from, it's really the response coming in the from, if you want to look at it that way, is in there. And that's essentially, I think, next slide, I think that's it on this one. So we've received a couple of reviews. Always prefer them on the mailing list, but we do appreciate the feedback. I was going to call for if we were interested in adoption today. I won't, at least with a couple of the comments we received back and then adding. So I'll bring this up again, either in Yokohama or earlier if we feel like it's or it's not Yokohama.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Just clarification. It's always possible to adopt a working group. So as soon as it will. So we don't need to wait for the meeting. We can adopt the documents through a mailing action.
Okay. All right. Well, then I think we'll take feedback over the next few weeks, and then we'll see if we can push.
Okay.
So next slide, this is my favorite one. Another 2 AVP RFC. So this unfortunately has more paperwork around it than it has specification. This is a per flow, and we worked through this in a couple of RFCs before. This is to be very specific IP flow 5 tuple, depending on what kind of concept or name you interchange this with. Maximum bit rate. So a couple of things and pretty common questions. It's not meant to be app level. There are other AVPs for that. ADC rules, if you're familiar with 3GPP, definitely address that in great detail. It's not intended to conflict with multipath, and I'll explain with that here in a minute. So it would be horrible to say that it actually just takes and identifies at the app level and just pushes it down. That defeats the whole multipath idea. It is meant to be an application, kind of an answer to ADC when it's simple, at least for filter rules and the workaround for IP filter rules. So in the hierarchical shaping that we have today, in the IETF, if we look at IETF AVPs, we have an aggregate max bit rate that applies to the filter. If we added these particular AVPs with their corresponding uplink and downlink, we could have a couple of scenarios. Like, for instance, we could limit the individual 5 tuple flows, so like 1.2 meg, but still allow, basically no limit at all, which if you follow kind of bitrate guidelines ensures that we would, for example, in linear video delivery, never see adaptive bitrate go above 720p, although most of the time it would actually be more akin to 480. We can also add a aggregate max bit rate and have things like you're allowed in the downlink or uplink to do something like 20 megabits, but no individual flow may dominate or be greedy. So if you follow like data center TCP or some of those algorithms, things like the L4S BOF have some proposals to kind of actually make that work a little better. But this is one example where we could just keep something from like data center TCP from dominating an individual link. So if you think about it, it would be the lowest level in the shaping hierarchy that we have specified for like mobility and the other AVPs. So next slide. Once again, this is motivation. It's not a silver bullet, right? If you're going to do apps, then we recommend doing app level filters. If you have a very narrow filter, go for it. But we wanted this as a compromise. We didn't necessarily want to push a bunch of deep packet inspection when it wasn't necessary. And also, we felt that this was the best compromise in light of the multipath technologies. So it allows some coexistence here. And as I would point out, this is one of the many levers we actually have in production today. And we've been using probably for about 6 years, at least for several of the North American operators. So here I'm looking more for feedback on this. This was pretty quiet. I got Dave Dulson provided some great feedback to improve the spec. We've made a couple of errors. But I think with this, because it's 2 AVPs, we'll also probably on the mailing list push for adoption once we have the updates.
Okay. All right. One.
Comment
Oh.
from Dave? I think.
So I think we're alone in Jabber again, so we can. Yes, just Stephen Farrell, a comment from me. So if you decide about the DNS filters,
Oh, yes.
can you explain kind of roughly what's that doing again?
Okay, so what that actually does, so at the highest level, forgetting about the AVP for a second, we have several rules and applications that look at the domain level and actually apply 0 ratings. So we actually do get things like charge control records, other things. The most common use case people give as an example is they want to apply a different rating or something to, say, google.com. In the child protections case, what actually happens is we'll get a domain, and you can think of it as actually a compound action. So the action is typically drop, and then we don't apply that to, at least in the US, we don't apply that to their bills. So it's also a 0 rate charge rule. So there's actually a much more strict enforcement that's applied. And so this is akin to, at least in the IETF equivalent, at least from a filter perspective, akin to what we think of in sponsored data connectivity without having the need for the RX interface and being so prescriptive with filters.
So would you expect that to be controversial at all?
We do note actually in the security section, right, that this has quite a few assumptions. And the first one we make is the very presence of this rule implies that the enforcement point has access to the actual responding DNS traffic.
Sure, but I mean, I guess there are other uses to which this particular AVP could later be put that are not necessarily the intended ones. Yeah.
Agreed, and so that's why we actually put in there that there is an assumption that you do have access to the clear text version of this, and so it is not meant to be widely applicable. It's very much a special access case for an enforcement point. So. This is not meant to be, and I think like many filter rules and filters extensions, it's not necessarily always applicable at every enforcement point.
Yeah, the issue is more that it's not that, it's the issue is that it can be abused for various other things that might make it controversial. In the IETF.
Absolutely, I'm well aware of that.
Right. Okay.
Yep. And not all things get adopted, so
okay.
I mean, that's I'm well aware of it. I think for us, it's that balance between what we're legally obligated to do and what we send as, what we send as vendor specific versus standard. So we'll give it a go. Policy groups. This actually, next slide. Oh, let's just keep going. So this basically allows us to group policies into a common naming of conventions for a couple different use cases. So the first one's for the actual life cycle policies. It's very akin to the base name. If you're familiar with 3GPP specs, we have several like charging base name, ADC base name, but basically it's about installation, modification, and deletion of a group of policies. So it's life cycle specific. However, here we would actually turn around and make it a little bit more generic. The other thing that we're trying to do is make things a little bit more consistent in rule ID support. So we do have classifier IDs, filter IDs, and some of the older specs as well. And there's some rules, and the specs are, I would say, mostly consistent about the use of filter IDs, but we do see filter IDs still appearing in purely diameter applications. So I think people, because they're not using 5777, are still basically bouncing around these identifiers. So we still don't have that consistency we'd like. And so what we're really trying to do with all of this naming is get to basically a very consistent pattern for applications of lots of rules, but to keep the actual number of distinct rules down on an enforcement point minimized. So this is actually very similar to what we do with charging characteristics, if you're familiar with those in 3GPP, but it's a lot more generalized, where we're not using a very convoluted kind of 16-bit sort of shorthand for basically large groups of rules. So next slide. When we actually look at common application rules across multiple customers, we see a couple things. We typically, as operators, assign customers to a domain. You're prepaid for MVNO1, you may be postpaid for MVNO2. We kind of get into these product level items. And then the service that they're actually being provided, internet or voice or whatever, And then we also add state. So basically whether they actually need to top up their bill, on entry, those sort of things, or they're in good standing, or they're a premium, kind of those Olympic services. Those are all really great pieces of information, but they're not really meaningful when it comes to actually running a filter rule. And we have applications like policy decision points that kind of expand that out into several IDs. So when we looked at the base name, although very good idea for rule lifecycle management, it's really insufficient for how we apply individual rules over a particular product set or domain set. So for example, if I have a very common default rule that's used across multiple product sets, the base name is only going to really talk to me about how that rule is installed, modified, or deleted as a group. Unfortunately, it's not going to tell me how I apply it. And so what we wanted to do was basically look at various solutions. We did look at arbitrary depth hierarchies and stuff in our analysis and even in some code, and found that they weren't ideal. So next slide. So what we ended up settling on was patterns, and not because we're really smart humans, but because we inserted some machine learning software that actually observed as we provisioned all of our customers in our network through simulations into a proposed design, looking at the filter rules and IDs generated. And what the learning software actually very quickly came back to was bit set patterns for application. And strangely enough, several of us in the group and looking at it thought these looked vaguely familiar. And we discovered that they actually were essentially basically larger bit expansions of service order codes that are used commonly in telcos in the United States. And there, basically what we do is we give each individual service that may invoke a group of rules an integer value. And there's a long convoluted process because it was built by Ma Bell back in the 50s for that. But basically, it's essentially a single ID, single integer that maps to one or more rules. And then what we essentially do with these is we take all of these integers, look at all of these rules, and then basically create a distinct set, a bit set, if you will, and then apply. Unfortunately, that was the way we used to do it. Now that we actually run several middle boxes in between, we tend to lose all that information. And what we found in examples for just default rules, to give you an idea, we had, roughly speaking, in one scenario configuration, 232 distinct default rules that were provisioned. But when we provisioned 60 million customers with 3 sessions each, it unfortunately came down to us as basically 180 million IDs. And what we found was we essentially had too many rules coming down into the enforcement point. When we applied the machine learning, they took the 232 rules and actually not only brought it down from 180, they brought it down to basically 12 default rules being installed. And we can talk offline, but there's a bunch of things we learned about the way we write rules as an operator with the machine learning to do this. So what we essentially did then was basically push with this, the design we have proposed here. So next slide. So conceptually, we have the base name. It's a single tier grouping mechanism. It's meant more for the lifecycle management. We then have the idea of membership. So we have membership can provide a base name. It's optional. It can provide a domain, and customers, if you think about NAS applications, stuff, are assigned membership. They're always given this bit set value. That's the most important piece. Policies, any sort of policy entity is also given the same sort of membership. They can belong to specific domains and have base names. So we essentially have a tie back to the life cycle as well as maybe the domain they're after. Because a lot of times what we found as we went from the 232 to the 12 is that we tend, even though we like to think that they're completely different rules, we tend to actually structurally over the wire provision exactly the same rule from completely different groups, but they believe they're different. So what we allow here then is for a rule or a policy entity, as we call it, to basically have multiple of these membership values where there's domains and base names and values. And that allows us then to once again collapse common rules that are common over the wire. The other thing that a policy entity has is a match type. So how to take that bit set value and a customer, if you will, or a end device's bit set value and actually match it. And so those are actually very similar to just basically your standard set relationship or point set relationship diagrams. So next slide. So membership is basically set up for a policy entity and a user. We take the policy memberships domain and it must equal the membership assignment for the user. So the domains must match because the base name is more about maintenance life cycle. And then we must pass and satisfy the match type for the binary values. And then as you see here, the match type is set up as a base enumeration, and this reflects essentially all relationships between two sets mathematically. It's very straightforward. This is something that allows us to basically convey this information to a decision point and very quickly set up, or even down to an enforcement point, very quickly set up a minimized set of policies. So next slide. So here's some examples, and we have some of the older terminology like the and not, which is essentially basically disjoint set memberships for application of rules. We also have basically inversion rules, some other things that are in there, and I apologize, it's a bit older presentation, but basically we're applying set memberships here for examples of when a particular rule ID applies. But I would urge you to read the spec, because it is, you kind of have to step aside a minute and go back to your old set membership theories and those sort of things. So it's a bit of a blast from the past for many of us. But we do know that this type of bit set pattern membership matching, at least for us, has yielded very good results. And having it in the diameter spec is only going to improve not only the efficiency over the wire, because we don't have to push down all these rules per session and we don't have to worry about pre-installed, but across multiple products, domains, or APNs, whatever kind of grouping mechanism you're using. So, so next steps, I'm definitely asking for read on this. This is, like I said, this takes a little bit to digest. This is not a trivial action, and we're going to keep adding more and more examples to this. So I'll leave it for questions.
Okay.
Okay.
You have 5 minutes.
Oh, well, then this will never work. Very simply, next slide. So this is our paranoia about NFV. So as we have more VNFs and as we authorize a user, we have a really hard time today in any sort of resource. We actually have to wait for a threshold for utilization to be crossed. And so it's kind of sad. I wait for a threshold utilization to be crossed before I raise an alarm to maybe get more resources. And in NFV, the idea here being that we're trying to right-size things based off needs. You know, this could be a little bit more dynamic as we get toward our busy hours as an operator than we'd like. And then off in the back office, we have these wonderful forecasting systems and these wonderful analytic systems that actually have a pretty good idea of the authorized user and their usage in terms of resources for the diameter client, so for the VNF in question. So what we thought was, if we could take that information about customer usage, say the CPU or the packets or whatever, and make it available at the time the authorization is granted, or really any time if you want to do a reauthorization or anything, if we can make that available to the diameter client in our line of thinking, the VNF, we can give the receiving client some indication of the implications of that authorization. That way, what they can do is get a little bit of an understanding, say maybe over the next 20 minutes, the next 30 minutes, the next 40 minutes, what the impact is. Now, our plan is to do something very similar to used and granted service units. We just call it predicted service units, or it's really predicted usage of service units. And it's very similar to the AVPs. And then you've all had a great suggestion, which was actually to add a bit more obvious AVPs to the device. So bytes is not necessarily the most useful, but bits per second is maybe a more useful. And adding time intervals is something we've discussed and had an option. But we do see this being responded back at least at any initial authorization of usage and but you can also respond back, say in a 4006 application significantly, right? If they go back and do a credit control request, in the answer, we could actually respond with different values if, say, the user has a different usage profile. This allows us to be a little bit more proactive. We're not actually expecting to write what the user will do for the next week in any of these authorizations, but allows us to be a little bit more proactive in kind of giving a heads up in terms of this, rather than the current situation we have today, which is we would get this out of band, if at all. Hopefully we would get it out of band about the same time we were authorized for a user. So I think this is much easier. However, I think probably before Stephen gets up and asks, this is definitely describing someone's usage. And so we once again going into great pains, even though we're already talking about an authorization where we've already, much to my annoyance, probably sent some privacy information like the equipment type and those sort of things. This is conveying a bit more about their usage profile for utilization. And that's part of the reason why we didn't want it out of band as well, because we do want to lean on the end-to-end security with this. And so once again, we do understand that we are getting it, but we want to put it in AVPs that are a bit more generic. But with the full understanding, yes, we are giving away a little bit more information. But we feel that from an operational perspective, it's probably a slightly better trade-off than what we have today, which is nothing or worse yet, an out-of-band, potentially not so secure mechanism. We've had one feedback, actually a couple of feedback now that we've got Yuval on things. There is a request to look at time of day options. I'm not actually a big fan of that. That's a really big AVP and quite frightening for me. It's also tough to code, so maybe I'm whining as a developer a little bit. But we'll look at that, and I think this is one of those that we'll go back to the mailing list after a bit more comment. We've only had two reviews, 2 comments, and look at that maybe as adoption over time.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's it.
Yeah. I have a general question is, so for all the news AVPs, what is the foreseen context of use? On which type of interfaces? It's on vendor-specific one or relying on an existing one in 3GPP context?
For all of the different?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we look at, say, the domain and arbitrary filters, because they're 5777 extensions, right? It's where, as we upgrade to the 5777 filter rule, where those would be most logically used. The per flow max bit rates actually come in line with all of the other shaper hierarchy flows in the same applications. So wherever you have a max bit rate sent down, this is yet another. I think operators, we like to limit our customers, or this is maybe arguably finding a new way, but through most of those diameter applications. So all of your access requests, those sort of things, anytime we're limiting usage. Let's see here. The policy groups and sets is very much around when we want to change the filters that are applied. So once again, you've got any sort of your access control applications. Arguably, that could be used in something like a 4006, although that's a little odd. I would think it would make much more sense to put in just the final unit indications and be done with that. But I could see people probably extending that out. And I think that's all of them. So yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. But but it means that, to come back to my initial question, is that something that will, for instance, use internally, not based on any other, because we are defining, so you want to define some standard AVP, right?
Yes.
And so obviously it could be along the documentation with the 5177, but that is only description of AVPs that could be used whenever you want.
Yeah.
So for this one, because initially it was introduced by requirement coming from different sources, I was wondering if there is a specific requirement coming from somewhere else that would force, not force, but that will push for the adoption of this set of new AVPs.
Yeah, so I think specifically, and I know it'll be a tough uphill discussion for the domain AVPs. I know at least for the American operators, there's pressure to get rid of the side loading as we go to VNFs, but no formal standards body pushing. Trying to think through the policy groups is just basically more of a research discovery we've had with us as an operator as we're actually trying to do control user plane separation. This ended up being something that was instrumental in optimizing the performance of the system. The per flow is it's one of those that we do in production. We're not the only operator that does per flow, and we're not. And I think there's several. I know with say the Sandvine product, we have an equivalent. We have several products that do vendor-specific versions of this for it. And then I'm trying to forget my fourth one there. But anyway, we have different sources for that. My question is, would it be of value for some of this to be more explicit about some of these origins? I know we also talked about implementation, that can go along with an RC in another worker yesterday. And I think some of these we can talk about some of the implementations that have occurred in production and what's in practice. And so I don't know if that would be helpful in describing some of these. So, but more than happy to provide.
And my other point, and I will finish on that, is that we will. So I will look at the draft, but we have to say. I think that more and more, maybe not with this one, but people want to rely on the diameter-based interface for kind of configuration. And we will have to. I will have actually to check if all the, for instance, the policy group and so on, if it is something that means to be managed per session, or actually it's a kind of a configuration that you would like to provide, and it can be time to time updated. So depending on this type of, I'm not saying that.
No, I would love, so I'm just thinking about selfishly about my network. I would love for it to be only configuration, but my product people move at a different speed, and the convolution and other codes that they're developing it used to be with software, we'd have a very long turnaround time. And now they've actually finally caught up to what they said they were going to do maybe 20 years ago. And so their updates for this happen in less than a day. And so when these occur, this is the other debate too, when these occur, do they affect existing sessions, those sort of things. So we're going through that internally within our own company, but this has been a fairly new capability probably in the last 3 years, the speed at which we can apply or reapply these policy groups. Has gone below the workday now. And if you talk to our product guys, they would like to, they're almost in kind of the Twitter type fashion where, someone makes a product change, they almost like a retweet or tweet want to actually have a product level response almost immediately. That frightens me a little because that sounds like they would really love to program the network themselves, and I welcome them to that. But we are getting very close to that.
Yeah, but in the other way, it was not, the system was not configured to be able to I know, just to close my comment. This system was not supposed to be able to be used to configure all these kind of functions, especially when you have millions and millions of users impacted by a change in the provisioning stuff, or not the provisioning, the charging info, charging capabilities, and so on. So I think it's a kind of trade-off, and we need to take care of that, even if we give the possibility to use this type of AVP to provide such kind of information.
Yeah, and we may be able to do more of a bulk kind of a group signaling equivalent of this and speed things up. I always feel reluctant giving this much broad power to my upstream customers, but I'm running out of excuses not to try to start doing this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's move on. We have something like 5 minutes left time and just a couple of things. So we will update the milestones, the few things. Yeah, they are what we can mark something done pretty soon.
Yeah.
And the next thing is like topics to add to charter. I don't think we have now anything that we need to add. We might need to add a couple of new milestones for the RFC 4006 bis. So that's the one. The next steps: ship out the bis version, and ship out the group signaling or drop it. And okay, that leaves us basically with one of the existing work items we have, which is the end-to-end AVP level security. And we will need to check what I'm about to do. Action points is the 3GCP LS response. That's okay. And also the adoption call for the 4006 bis. And then the couple of what about the future of this working group. We need to do this kind of working group future check. As you can see, we are overflowing with the participation in our meetings. That's one thing now, and then there's something else.
Yeah, the other info is that I will have to slow down a little bit the IETF because most likely next week I will be elected as working group chair in 3GPP. That means additional meetings and so on. So I will not able to attend. I will not say anymore, but not as often as it was today. So it's surprising because last time there were very few people in the room, and this one we have at least 10 people or more, and a lot of document to deal with. But I think that we can try. So, and even for the next meeting, it is the same week than the 3GPP meeting. So anyway, I will not be there. So the question regarding the room allocation and so on is that if we would like to maintain a face-to-face meeting at the next meeting and also for the other meetings, and or if we can go through mailing list action points and virtual meeting if needed. So this is something we don't have to. So you can give your feedback if any. It is something anyway that will be discussed on the mailing list, and we need to figure out what will be the future of the working group. So I think that there is enough to maintain anyway. So it's not to close the working group. The working group will still will remain, but it's more about basically from a practical point of view, the face-to-face meeting, how to manage them.
Like, yeah, really. So that, for example, can we manage like with only without meeting, for example? So that kind of thing. So we can always have the kind of interims in the virtual interim meetings if needed and stuff like that. But we basically had this one major thing to push through, which is the 4006 bis, and the and don't yet see whether we need to actually have a face-to-face time for it to be seen. It can be different once we actually hit into the next editions of the document.
Steve Donovan, I think that the security work might be better done with might benefit from some face-to-face time if we push that forward. Otherwise, yeah, we're kind of sleepy right now. So.
And then basically for this one, we will need more input or comments because Uni will not be able to or no, he will not. So we need. I think that there is. We know from the beginning that there is interest on this topic, but the fact is that we are too few people to work on this specific area. For end-to-end security, I think I was one of the only one providing comments, and we need more people involved in first to ensure that we will have a good solution. Because, for instance, we cannot rely on the security guys in other areas. They are saying, doing what you are doing, and we will review the document that, after that. But we cannot. There is no one volunteer to help on this one. And we know that there is a requirement for the end-to-end security, especially because now we have more roaming and roaming interfaces.
So hopefully we can kind of get the, for example, what happened with the overload. So we get the 3GPP people interested, and they will come and kind of help us to do that. But before that, we need to get into a phase that we actually have something concrete. And the old document that I have, I don't think that is good enough for that purpose. It has some ideas, but as Lionel said, me pushing that alone is a non-starter. All right, we are done.
Thank you. Any
Thank
other
you.
business just before closing the meeting? Or you're free. Thank you.
Yay!
I saw your email. Okay. I agree. I think I will check what is the I will check what is the real proposal. Not the real, but at least how it is implemented in the document. It's true that what is tricky is not in Europe. It's regarding the